Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Onboarding, Transform How You Bring Aboard New Customers and Staff Efficiently. My name is Teresa Resick, and I'm the Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. I just want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. As we get started, just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows that we have available to you. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of those widgets that we have for you. And Group Chat is one of those widgets. So open that up by clicking the icon that will say Group Chat, and in there you'll be able to text chat with each other, but also with a few of us from here at AIIM. Do ask questions of the speakers throughout our time today using the Q&A feature. And we will hold these until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. You can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You may download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list. And there's also a few other links in there just to help you learn about some other things that we're talking about today. So just click in there at any time, and that resource will open in a new browser tab, and you can save it and read it after the webinar. And at the end of this webinar, there will be a brief survey. It'll open in your browser, and it's also in the widgets below in the slide area. And I would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. I would like to introduce our featured speaker that we have with us today. Bob Larrabee is the Vice President and Chief Analyst of Market Intelligence at AIIM. Bob is an expert in the application of advanced technologies and process improvement to solve business problems and enhance business operations. With over 30 years of industry experience, including product management, R&D, marketing, sales, and education, his passion is to share his knowledge and experience with organizations seeking to improve their operations, embrace technology, and drive their businesses forward. As we were leading up to our webinar that we're having here today, I was sitting in there and I decided to go into a web browser and search on things like new employee onboarding, business partner onboarding, or customer onboarding. And if you do that, you'll find a lot of great tips and suggestions for making the experience fruitful and productive for all the people involved. I even found some handy checklists for things to do and things to avoid related to onboarding. It's one thing to know the steps you need to take, and those steps include things like gathering information about and from the person, getting that information into the right database, and documenting all of your processes so you can offer easily repeatable and consistent experiences. But just how do you go about actually collecting and processing that information within your organization? What other factors should you be concerned with? And when Bob and I were talking about this, we decided that to help us gauge where you stand, we wanted to ask you a poll. And so relating directly to this, so if you'd come up to your keyboards and check all that apply, because there's a lot of choices in here, so let me read through all of those. But for the onboarding scenario that you have in mind, what areas do you need the most help with in your organization? Do you need help with documenting the overall process of what to collect, when, where to route it, approvals along the way, documenting what information and data that you need to collect, capturing all of that required and or helpful information or data in the various ways it's given to us, getting that information into the system, whatever that system may be, routing this information to the correct departments for the next steps, communicating with the client, customer, citizen, new employee, where you are in your process and what's expected next in that automated way, or how to handle exceptions with the data and the processes. Are you looking to minimize delays and exceptions? Exception handling is an important one as well. Or are you looking to ensure that the information is secure and private and only the right people have access to it within your organization? So I just want to give you a second to check all of the things that concern you about your onboarding scenario and what the steps that you're looking to improve upon so that things go more smoothly in your organization. This is where I'm going to bring Bob Larrabee in because in just a second we're going to go ahead and take a peek at the results and see where our audience members are saying where they feel they need some help with. So thank you for joining us today, Bob.
Hey, thanks, Teresa. It's great to be back here, and thanks for having me back. And welcome everybody, all of our friends joining us from around the world. Great to have you all here with us. These are some interesting choices, and the one that really strikes me, of course, today, given the current news, if you will, is the one about security and privacy. And that only the right people have access to the info. If you follow what's going on in the world today, in fact, just before this webinar began, I was catching a little bit of the news, and of course, Facebook is out there in the news because of what had happened or what's been going on as far as the security around the information that was there. And all of the things that are coming into question in relation to that. So it's been kind of an interesting situation. And as we look at the responses here, we see, 68% or 66%, I should say. If my eyes were working better, I'd be able to read it better. But 66% are saying documenting what information we need to collect is very important to them. As we scroll down here, we see, 58% communicating with the client, customer, citizen, new employee, where we are in the process and what's expected next in an automated way. So that's a very important topic for them. 50% are saying how to handle exceptions with the data and processes. And, of course, 41%, the information security, 41% looking at other areas, another 50% up here documenting the overall process of what to collect. That's an interesting one. What do you need to collect? When do you need to collect it? Where to route it to? And the approvals along the way. So all very important, but the number one is documenting what information or data we need to collect. And so this is a very important thing to understand what it is that you need. And, of course, the idea of when you should collect it, how you should collect it, where it should be kept, and so on. So the idea of onboarding is one thing, but all of these different elements of onboarding that are so very important. And so when we talk about onboarding, we think about things like employee, whether it's a new employee, whether it's a customer or a partner. First impressions, of course, are very important, and that's all part of the onboarding process. And how you bring these folks on board, whether, again, it's a customer or a partner or an employee, and how you welcome them to the organization is very, very key. And so for each of these interactions, you want to have a process that ensures their experience is one that's enjoyable, that the transition of onboarding and that whole transition, welcome to the team or welcome to the company or welcome as a customer is a smooth one, and that the process overall is something that's repeatable. And that repeatable is something I think that is very, very important, something that you just basically, you've got this process in place and you know that it's going to be consistent. So in short, for any of these scenarios, the customer, the employee, the partner, and so on, you'll want to integrate your workflow, your document management, your records management, data privacy, security, possibly case management, and more to expedite these new relationships with ease. And so the idea being simplicity, right? That you've now got this this new person coming on board, this new client coming on board, this new partner, and you want to make it as simple as possible. No complexities. And so welcome to the team, right? And that's what it's all about. So let's make this transition as painless and as simple as we can. So the information that we're dealing with comes at us in many different forms and from many different places. It could be a paper resume or a CV, for example, from an applicant posting for an open position with your business. Could be digital correspondence that's coming from a client or a supplier. It could, or in the case of legal, it could be coming from the opposition, right? The plaintiff or the defendant. In a loan application, it could be information that's collected through an electronic form on your website. Or it could be information that's relevant in a healthcare case. Maybe there's something going on, some diagnostics that's been done, and the diagnostic physician is sending some information through. So all these different elements that you're dealing with, the information is going to come at you from many different places, many different forms. And the key in all of these instances is to capture this information as quickly as possible and bring that information into your information ecosystem to be acted upon, right? And this is where we talk about things like capturing that information at first touch point, the first touch point in the process, or as quickly as you can in that process, regardless of what form it is. So it could be in digital form, it could be in paper form, it could be even in video, right? It could be a video file that you're talking about, or an audio file. Now, a lot of times what we're hearing still today is that there's a lot of manual processes out there. And I hear this constantly as I travel around the globe, and I do a lot of lectures, and I've done a lot of training and so on. And I hear from a lot of folks that there's still a lot of manual processes in place, especially when we talk about those that are paper intensive. Those really slow things down considerably. And they're prone to a lot of risk and a lot of lost information, or information that can be misplaced while it's in transit. I mean, think about that. You've got paper files, you've got folders, you've got things that are in transit. In some cases, within the same building perhaps, but there's also a lot of times where it might be traveling across campus, or it could be traveling across town. It could be traveling from state to state, or even around the world. And all of a sudden it gets misplaced, or it's, well, I'll give you an example. There was one customer that I was, person I was talking to that said they lost, and it wasn't really lost, it was misplaced, it was misshipped, some documents, and these were critical documents that were being shipped from Los Angeles to Hong Kong. And somehow, somewhere along the way, they wound up in Vancouver. From Vancouver, they tracked it to Japan, and then from Japan, finally to Hong Kong. How that happened, nobody knows, but instead of being there overnight, it took a couple days. So, the courier service that they had, of course, was the one that was responsible for that, and this does happen in real life. So this not only presents a cost factor, but there's also a high risk factor here for lost revenue in banking, reduced student population in higher education, potential misdiagnosis in healthcare. If we're talking about litigation and the legal process, I mean, there's all kinds of implications that go along with this. And so when you think about a manual process in your organization and how long it takes for information to flow through that process from end to end before the transaction is complete, this could be significant. And so think about that, in your own organizations, right? Those of you that have joined us, think about what that means. What could be the impact of something like that? That if something were to happen to that information, perhaps a loan application that takes 6 weeks to process from the time it enters the branch office until the time the offer is made and the contract is signed. Or maybe a university, right? Maybe you're with a university and you're processing transcripts and applications or student loan applications. How long does it take today for that information, whether it be paper or digital, to move through the organization from department to completion? And these are things that we need to consider, looking at the end-to-end process. And when we're talking about onboarding, we want to get this process done as quickly and as painlessly as possible, right? That's the idea of the whole of onboarding. We want to get people through the system. We want to get our partners, our employees, our customers through the system as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And so we don't want anything to happen to that information. So this is where we talk about digitalized core business processes. And digitalizing the business process is much more than just automating the steps of the manual processes. I mean, we can do that. We've been doing it for years with workflow. But what it means is taking information, capturing it at that first touch point, right? And so the minute we get that information, the minute we touch that, what we want to do is whether it's paper, whether it's a digital form or forms-based information, what we want to do when we receive that is bring that into our information ecosystem. And once it's captured, once we get a hold of that, we use automation technologies and recognition technologies to identify that information, to extract essential data from that information, classify it so we know what it is, we can classify it properly, and then trigger the appropriate workflows to begin the operational processes that we need to complete the business and the process, right? So think about that. If it's a loan application, for example, if it's a student application, in the university, whatever the case might be, what we want to do is identify what is this piece of information that I have, what do I need to do with it? So there may be rules engines involved, and what we do is we use these rules engines to help us determine the related actions and make decisions based on a set of criteria. So eliminating the need potentially for human intervention at this point. So for example, with customer onboarding in banks for a loan or credit card application processing, if the applicant meets certain criteria, the application is approved, right? So if they have the right credit status, if they have the right income levels, whatever the criteria is, then we approve it and it goes on through. And the credit card or the loan is issued. So if it's not, then maybe it's redirected to bank personnel for further action. So it could be maybe they need to get some more documentation or they need to prove something. So we then set it out for exception processing, right? And that's when it goes to somebody, bank personnel for further actions. So in this way, we can the process becomes streamlined, and we can manage higher volumes of information or transactions, and the customer wait times are reduced. Right? So the same could be said of universities processing enrollment applications, where the manual process may take, say, 6 weeks. I'm hypothetical. And the automated process may reduce this down to as little as 1 week. I even heard one mid-sized university or college say that they've been able to reduce it down to a couple days. So the idea being that the application comes in, it meets a certain set of criteria, everything lines up appropriately, we can send out a letter of acceptance without having to deal with anything else, right? And we only deal with the exception processing from a human standpoint. And so these are some of the things that we can look at from an onboarding standpoint to make that whole transition as seamless and as easy as possible. So the other thing, too, that we need to deal with in talking about all this, and security and data privacy have become extremely focus areas for many organizations. We all know that security and data privacy are and continue to be at the forefront of many business discussions. So we hear about security breaches in the news and increased regulations as a result of all of this. I had one person tell me that they still prefer their old paper records vault because there's only one way in and out of it, and it's under total control, their control. And people have to sign for the records when they take them and sign them back in when they're returned. And one of the questions that I asked was, do you know what happens after these records leave your records room? And the individual said, well, they signed for them and they're responsible for them, and when I get them back, I know that, they're here. And I said, but do you know if they've been copied or viewed by unauthorized personnel. And the response that I got, well, that's against the policy. And so I just kind of looked at him and said, well, the answer clearly is you're not sure whether anything's happened to those documents. So they really aren't secure. And this is true of digital records that are stored on network drives, on PCs and file shares, is once they're out there, and when we talk about file shares and we talk about these different technologies that are in use today, if someone else grants access to these files, public access in particular, we have no clue what's happening to them or how many copies there are that are being made. If we send a copy via email, has that then been shared with other people that we're not aware of? And so this is a major risk, security and data privacy. And so we have to be cognizant of these things. And we have to take this into account every time we create files, every time we deal with this type of information, is that security and data privacy are essential, especially when we talk about onboarding. And so do we really want to start sharing files? Do we want to start spreading files around? Or does it make more sense to have a repository where we link to that file? Or maybe we have some other means where if we do use file shares, it's file shares with limited access or time-based access. So this is why it's even more important than ever to capture that information at first touch point and get it under control in the information ecosystem. It needs to be made secure to prevent unauthorized access and also to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations like HIPAA, for example, in the healthcare industry in the U.S., GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation in the European Union, and so on. These focus on personal information, but there's also other sensitive information beyond that that needs protection, like intellectual properties, inventions, patented materials, and software code and programs and blueprints and all these other things in a corporation that we need to be concerned with as well. And so, when it comes to onboarding, there's nothing really more important than your employee and customer and supplier information, and we really have to lock that down. It has to be protected at all costs because this is the most precious information of all. It's the most precious information asset that we have. I mean, imagine what could happen if employee information were leaked from a government agency. Oh, wait a minute. This has really happened, as has other types of information. That type of information has been leaked in the past, and not just from the U.S. Other types of government agencies have had this happen. Also, not just governments, but corporations as well. And so we have to make sure that security and privacy take front stage. And so, things like Social Security numbers, things like credit card numbers, things like in the healthcare industry, all kinds of financial information, all kinds of healthcare information that has to be protected. From an HR standpoint, the personnel information that's held. So one of the things that I am responsible for, as Teresa mentioned earlier, is I'm the chief analyst at AIIM, and we do a lot of research. And I'm sure that a lot of you have been questioned or have been solicited by us to participate in our surveys. And I do thank each and every one of you that has taken part of it. And I hope you do continue to do that because it's very important to gather this information and get a pulse on what's going on out there. And one of the recent surveys that we did, we found that there are reports of data loss and security breaches. It's at an all-time high. Yet not all of them are the result of external hacking. And in fact, the result of internal staff is actually higher, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally exposing data beyond the corporate walls. And this is to people who don't have the right to access it. When we asked about knowledge of data loss or breaches, nearly a quarter said they didn't know of any, while 38% said they hadn't had any of the ones we listed. which begs the question, okay, which ones did you have? And then 10% did report data loss due to staff negligence or bad practices. In fact, along with this, we heard not only is data loss from staff negligence common, so are compliance fines and e-discovery costs that are run over $1 million due to the inability to quickly and accurately find their information. So this is significant. The risk is high. The cost is extremely high. And so this gets back to what we were saying before, is we need to secure that information. We need to protect it, not just because it's a compliance issue, but look at the cost here, $1 million, just because we can't find it. Never mind the cost if we were to be found in non-compliance. GDPR, for example, it could lead up to 4% of your net revenues in fines. And so these are some of the things that we have to be aware of. When we talk about onboarding, we're collecting a lot of information about employees, about customers, about partners that has to be maintained and kept private. Think about your own information, your own personal data, and how much that means to you. And what could happen if somebody got their hands on it that shouldn't have it, right? And that puts you at risk personally. Never mind, your company, but it puts you at risk personally. And so what to do about all of this? What should we be considered or should we be concerned with? And so, what I like to think about, or what I'd like you to think about, is look at your onboarding processes and take a step back and identify the manual steps in those processes, right? Pick something. Look at your financial department, look at your HR department. I mean, there's all kinds of places that you can go. And review the risks that are posed by the types of information that you hold should they be lost or exposed. And try to make senior management aware of the potential consequences of a breach. And this should include those involving internal staff or caused by general negligence. Think about what we were just talking about. Internal staff is one of the highest risks, not external hacking. Not external hacking. But these are internal folks that may be sharing information using things like email, using things like file shares. And look for ways to capture vital information at the first touch point of the process and bring it into your information ecosystem right then and there. Okay? So once it's captured, think about the use of automation and recognition technologies to identify that information, extract the essential data that you need, classify that information and then trigger those appropriate workflows to begin the operational processes needed to complete business processes, right, in your transactions. Okay? So it's basically take a holistic approach, take a holistic view, and assess where electronic forms might be able to be used in place of paper-based forms. So if you're using paper forms now, how could you replace those? And how could that be integrated with your digital processes? If you're not sure of where to begin on this, then what I would suggest is seek some professional assistance or training to help determine, the right path. Look for current suppliers and service providers for guidance, and come to AIIM. Right? You're here today, right, to listen to this webinar and gain some insights. There's all kinds of resources available to you here. This webinar being one of them to help you kind of think a little bit differently, get a little bit of an insight, a different insight. But there's all kinds of resources available to you on our websites. And really take that first step forward. Take that first step forward and start asking the questions. Why do we do things the way we do it? Why are we doing it the way we have been all these years? Why can't we do it a little bit differently? Is there a way that we could change the way we're doing it today and make it digital? Is there a point in the process we could capture this information sooner? that first touch point. This is a paper form. Could we put it up on our website? Could we capture this information electronically? Do we really need the paper? So take the time every day as you're sitting there and you're doing your work. Keep that in the back of your mind. How am I doing this now? How could I do this differently tomorrow? Is there a better way? So with that, I'm going to bring it back to you, Teresa.
Okay,
and
Bob?
I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Well, while you catch your breath, thank you for all of the really good information you've been sharing. I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'm going to actually bring it up right now because you had mentioned, the resources that AIIM offers and our training being one of them. I just wanted to point out to you, because the folks in our training department is like, Teresa, you need to tell everybody about this special offer we have rolling right now. And AIIM is offering 1 year of unlimited access to AIIM's entire online training library. Now, when I went and looked at what they meant by everything in the training library, I was thrilled to see it also includes the online CIP prep course. So that's more than $9,600 of what would be our online training for less than $2,500 a year for this special offer. So, if you want to read up on what the individual course is and what it does cover, all the details about each of our programs are at AIIM.org/training. But to take advantage of this particular special offer, and that it is good until the end of March 31st is when this offer expires, to get this unlimited training, all online, so it's all self-paced, and the way that it is presented, the self-learning is very easy to pick up on, and you can go back and rewatch presentations and review them again. So it's a really cool way for embracing the online training. But to get the link for this, when you download a copy of the PDF of the presentation, just click on this Mr. Muscleman slide in there, and that will take you to the link over for the online training, so that you'll be able to get the details of the special offer and to take advantage of it. You can also, so just by clicking on that link, because we can also have someone reach out to you as well, answer your questions about the different programs. I personally have taken so many of the programs, the ECM ones, the BPM process improvement ones, ERM. I did the ERM program about a year ago, and for me, most recently, the ones that I have taken have been the CIP prep course. And quite honestly, I couldn't have passed the CIP exam without having taken that prep course, and so that is a whole lot of training that is well worth it. And so it's highly encourage you to check that all out. And this is just one of the many resources that we have available to you at AIIM.org, but this is just some really valuable education that we just wanted to make you aware of that's out there right now. So just a little more than a week away before this offer expires. So do check that out.
It is a great course.
And so, so I also wanted to go back in and so please submit the questions that you have coming in. One of the things that when Bob was talking about the what to do, and a couple of things that were that I'm seeing in my the hamster wheel of my own brain rolling on these things, and back to the survey that little poll that we took at the very beginning, when so many people are concerned about what information to capture or how to capturing all that they're very concerned with what to put into their processes for the onboarding. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, Bob, about getting the right people to come together to help brainstorm through this so that whether it's your department or for the whole organization, or start in one department, start in HR with onboarding, or a process in accounting for that new organization coming in, and bring the right teams together. For if we are starting in, say, HR, have your HR professionals there, have your records management team there, someone from legal, the people who are actually going to be doing the data collection or the data entry, all that very valuable work, and bring the right people together to sit around the table and go, okay, because if one person thinks, well, I think we need to collect these 10 bits of information, whether how big or small those bits of information are we truly using all of those, or are we not collecting the right things at the right time? And have those brainstorming sessions. Literally block an hour to sit down and pull the people in, to pull all of the right stakeholders in to start having that conversation and start taking those notes. And if you're hearing from the front lines of what information you really need to capture to use down the line versus what you've just been collecting because it was needed 5 years, 20 years ago, but you don't really need it today, you still need to go through the effort to collect and capture that information. So that's one way of bringing all of that together. And Bob, some of your thoughts on that.
No, you're absolutely right. And today, and this is something I think that's extremely important. GDPR. The GDPR from the European Union is impacting organizations, whether you're in the European Union or not. And this is something, it's a topic that's been a real interesting one because GDPR was passed in 2016 and it will be enforced beginning in May of this year, in 2018.
This Sunday, the 25th, it goes into effect.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because, in May, everybody's, I've heard a lot of companies here in the U.S. that have said, oh, that's a European Union thing, I don't have to worry about it. And my first question is, do you transact business over there? Well, yeah. Okay, then you need to worry about it. Or I'll say, do you have employees over there? Well, yes. Well, then you have to worry about it. Because if you transact business in the EU or you have employees that are in the EU, then you are absolutely subject to GDPR. And what it means is when it comes to data and security and privacy, then you have to adhere to the GDPR regulations. So as you're going through and making determinations of what you have to capture, when you have to capture it, and how long it can be kept, the retention policies, that comes into play now. But there are also some other elements of GDPR that have to be dealt with as well. And one of them is the right to be erased. I know that's kind of an interesting term, but I want to be erased. But basically what it means is if you want your information scrubbed from a database, you pretty much tell the company, I'll give an example. Let's say, for example, I'm dealing with H&M, and I'm a client of H&M. It's a company that I know that has stores here in the U.S., but also over there. And so I decide I don't want their credit card anymore, and I want to be eliminated from their database altogether. Then I can submit to be taken out of their system. And they have to do it within a certain time frame. And then they have to prove to me that they've done it. But not only do they have to show me that they've done it on their system, they have to prove that they've made every effort to scrub my information from people who they've exchanged it with. So in other words, if they've shared my information with somebody else, they have to make sure that they've notified those other people that I want my information eliminated. I know I'm simplifying this whole thing, but that just gives you a sense of what it means. And so when you talk about having a team effort, Teresa, you're absolutely right, because what that means is Now you've got to have somebody, maybe not just from legal, but somebody that understands what those regulations are. And in the case of GDPR requires that you have somebody dedicated to that regulation on staff if you're in the EU. And so it really is an interesting situation, but it's a team effort. It has to be a team effort.
Yeah. And which does go back to not collecting all kinds of information on your employees or your customers because it's interesting information, but only collecting what you need to conduct business.
Right.
And to complete that transaction and to conduct business, because you don't want to. Why run the risk of having that extraneous information be that Achilles heel for your organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's only what you need for that specific person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it comes back to good information governance practices and the core of. I don't want to say this is it's not derogatory in any way of core technologies of information capture and records management, but there's elements of that are still and always will be so crucial to our business processes and for the digital transformation of our organizations. So you still can't neglect those elements.
That's right. Right.
Well, I also want to take a minute, Bob, and just talk a little bit about the AIIM conference that we have coming up. And very thrilled to say that we're getting down to the wire here. It's only 3 weeks away, and which actually there's still enough time for you to make the commitment to come to this, to get your travel arranged for it, and would love to see you down there. We're going to be in San Antonio, Texas at this annual conference. I know we have some really exciting keynote speakers lined up and lots of really great educational sessions and a whole lot of roundtable discussions, a lot of simultaneous tracks going on. And so, like I said, there's still time to register and still make time to make those plans. So at aimconference.com is where you can get the wealth of information. There's a lot of details up there of the sessions that will be taking place, who the speakers are going to be. I know there's a variety of pre-con sessions of AIIM's training programs. So, Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences at AIIM conferences and how great that they've been?
Even before I worked for AIIM, I started attending them back in 1986, and I haven't missed one yet. They're great. They are great. And I say that not as an employee, but as a professional member. You're right about the roundtables, some really great discussions. The pre-cons, I'm actually going to be delivering the one on process automation, digitalizing your business processes. So, how interesting that we're talking about that today. So, yes, I will be there. I know you're going to be there as well.
Yes, I will be.
But, yeah, we got some. Go ahead.
I was going to say our events team has been doing a lot of really great efforts with this year. I'm so excited to be down there because also having receptions for people, if this is their first time attending conference, to connect you with other people. There's a whole thing called brain dates that we're using, and it's just a way of collaborating with your fellow conference attendees for sharing knowledge. We're not the only ones with all of the answers or with answers. There's so many great minds coming down there to learn, and so they're facilitating how to learn from each other as well. And Women in Information Management is a group that's going to be meeting down there. A lot of our special interest groups are going to be having on-site get-togethers there. So there's a wealth of networking and learning opportunities above and beyond what's going to be taking place in the different sessions and roundtable discussions.
And that's one of the things that I've consistently heard, and I'm a true believer in it myself because that's one of the things that kept me going, was the networking aspect of it, was meeting other folks like me who were having issues like I was. And it was a great place to be able to sit down and talk with other folks and say, hey, have you ever run into this or have you ever seen this before? And learn that I'm not the only one. I wasn't the only one that was dealing with some of these business problems. and to really get some different perspectives on things and go back to my home and say, okay, let's try this. I ran into somebody the other day that was running into the same business problems that we have, and here's something that they tried and it works. Let's see if it will work for us. So it really is a great forum for that.
Yes, definitely. Well, Bob, it looks like we've come to the end of our webinar time today. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Just a reminder that we have recorded the session, and it will be available in a day or two. Don't forget to check out the resources, take the survey. But I just want to, back to the onboarding topic of the heart of what we talked about today. Bob, I want to ask you to leave the audience with your closing thoughts.
Well, onboarding is, in my view, one of the most important steps in a process of bringing somebody on board. Whether it's an employee, a customer, it's that first impression, and you can never change that first impression. And so to get it right is vital. You can't change that first impression. And I can't stress enough how using automation, how doing some of the things that we talked about today can make that difference between having it be a failure, having it be mediocre, it was okay, or having it be a stellar experience where, wow, this was just like so smooth and it was so great, and wow, this company, this bank, this university, my new employer, they really have their act together. That really can make a huge, huge difference. And so this is one of the things that I think, really step back and think about it. What kind of processes do you have for onboarding? How can you make it better?
Well, thank you, Bob. And you've been listening to Bob Larrivee, our Chief Analyst here at AIIM. And thank you very much for attending today. For AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you at our next webinar. Have a great afternoon.